Are you ever told something your whole life that cuts so deep, it starts to feel like a fact? My grandmother called me a bastard for 30 years, and I believed her until the day her lies collapsed. For most of my life, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. I was the mistake, the shame, the kid everyone tolerated, but never really claimed I'm 30 now. And only recently did I find out that the woman who spent decades reminding me I didn't belong was hiding the one truth that would have destroyed her power over me. I want to tell you how a single word spoken over and over can shape a childhood, how silence can hurt more than yelling, and how the person who tried hardest to erase me ended up proving I was the only one who truly belonged. I grew up in a small Midwestern town, the kind where everyone knows your last name before they know your first. I lived with my mom in a modest house that always smelled like laundry detergent and burnt toast. My parents divorced when I was 4, and my dad was mostly a shadow after that. Birthdays, occasional weekends, awkward phone calls that felt like talking to a stranger. But my grandmother, my mom's mother, was always there. She lived 10 minutes away and somehow managed to be present in every major moment of my life without ever offering warmth. Her name was Margaret, but she insisted everyone call her Maggie, and she had this way of smiling without her eyes ever changing. The first time she called me a bastard, I was 6. I didn't even know what the word meant. I had spilled grape juice on her carpet, and she grabbed my wrist a little too tight, looked down at me and muttered under her breath, "Figures bastards never listen." I remember nodding like I understood, because kids do that when adults say things that feel bad but confusing. Later that night, I asked my mom what a bastard was. She froze for just a second too long, then told me it was a bad word and that Grandma Maggie didn't mean it like that. I learned early that asking questions about my grandmother made my mom nervous, so I stopped. But the word didn't stop. It showed up at holidays when I didn't say thank you loud enough, or when I forgot to call on her birthday, or when I laughed too much at the dinner table. Sometimes she said it quietly. Sometimes she said it like a joke. Sometimes she didn't say it at all, but made sure I heard it in her tone. By the time I was 10, I knew exactly what she meant. Or at least I thought I did. She meant I wasn't legitimate, I wasn't planned, I wasn't wanted the way my cousins were. My aunt's kids were golden. Everything they did was cute or smart or impressive. When I did the same thing, it was annoying or sloppy or proof that I was exactly what she said. Family gatherings were the worst. My grandmother would seat me at the kids' table long after everyone else had moved on. She'd introduce my cousins proudly. "This is Emma, she's top of her class. This is Ryan, he's already talking about college," and then she'd gesture vaguely in my direction and say, "And this is my daughter's boy. Not grandson, just boy." I watched how she hugged them, how she slipped them cash, how she listened when they talked about their lives. When I talked, she'd interrupt or correct me or ask if I was sure about whatever I was saying in that tone adults use when they don't believe you. Once when I was 13, I finally snapped. She had made a comment about how kids like me never amounted to much, and I asked her why she hated me. The room went quiet. She looked at me like I'd just broken some unspoken rule and said, "Hate is a strong word. I just believe in calling things what they are." My mom pulled me aside later and begged me not to provoke her. She said Grandma Maggie was old-fashioned, that she had her reasons, that I just needed to keep my head down and get through it. That was the first time I realized my mom wasn't going to protect me from her. She wasn't agreeing with her exactly, but she wasn't stopping her either. So I learned to shrink. I learned to keep my grades high, my mouth shut, my emotions locked down. I became the kid teachers described as quiet and mature for his age, which is usually code for someone who learned early that attention comes with consequences. I didn't bring friends over because I was embarrassed. I didn't talk about my family much because I didn't know how to explain why my own grandmother treated me like an inconvenience. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself blood didn't mean anything. I told myself I'd leave one day and never look back. But here's the thing. No matter how much you tell yourself, something doesn't hurt. It still does. Especially when it comes from someone who's supposed to love you. When I was 16, my grandfather died. He was my grandmother's husband, and honestly, the only buffer between her and the rest of us. He wasn't warm exactly, but he was neutral, and neutral felt like safety. After the funeral, my grandmother changed. She got sharper, meaner, like she no longer cared to hide what she thought. That's when she started saying it outright, not under her breath. Not as a joke, she'd look me dead in the eye and say, "You know, you're not really family, right?" The first time she said that, my chest went tight and hot like I was going to throw up. I asked her what she meant, and she laughed a dry, humorless laugh and said, "Oh, please, everyone knows. You think I don't know how you came to be." I went home that night and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked for signs that I didn't belong. The wrong nose, the wrong eyes, the wrong shape of face. I started wondering if the reason my dad never really showed up was because maybe he wasn't really my dad. I asked my mom again. She cried that time actual tears and told me my grandmother was cruel and bitter and that I shouldn't listen to her. I asked if there was any truth to what she was saying, and my mom said no, not at all, and then asked me to please drop it. I wanted to believe her. So I did. Or at least I pretended to. I moved out at 18, went to college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I kept my distance from my family. I showed up for major holidays, and that was it. My grandmother still found ways to remind me who she thought I was. Even as an adult, she'd say things like, "You've done well for someone like you." Or, "I guess not all bastards end up in jail." I learned to smile through it because confronting her never changed anything. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that one day she'd die. And that would be the end of it, that the story would end with her bitterness, and I'd finally be free. I was wrong because last year she got sick. Really sick. And when doctors start using words like limited time and arrangements, people start saying things they've held back for decades. When my mom called me and said Grandma Maggie wanted to see me, I almost didn't go. Part of me hoped she'd pass without another word between us. But curiosity has a way of pulling you back into places you swore you were done with. I didn't know that walking into that hospital room was the first step toward unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. And I definitely didn't know that the woman who spent 30 years calling me a bastard was about to admit something that would flip every insult, every memory, and every silence upside down. Right at the moment when she could no longer take it back, I didn't go into that hospital room expecting closure. I went in, expecting one last jab, one last reminder of what she thought I was. I rehearsed neutral responses in my head, the way you do before seeing someone who's hurt you for years. I told myself I was an adult now that words couldn't touch me anymore. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tubes everywhere, skin thin and pale, but her eyes were the same sharp, alert, calculating. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "Well, look who finally showed up." I stood there awkwardly, hands in my pockets, not sure if I was supposed to hug her or sit or leave. I settled for sitting in the chair by the bed and said, "Mom told me you wanted to see me." She nodded slowly, studying my face like she was comparing it to a photograph only she could see. "You've changed," she said. "So have you." I replied and immediately hated myself for the sarcasm. It slipped out before I could stop it. She didn't react. Instead, she looked almost amused. Good, she said. You should have changed. There was a long silence. The machines filled the room with soft beeping. I wondered how many minutes I was supposed to give this before I could politely escape. Then she sighed a deep, tired sigh and said, I don't have much time and there are things you deserve to hear. That sentence alone made my stomach twist. No one had ever said I deserved anything from her. She asked if I knew why she never liked me. The question was so blunt, it felt like a trap. I shrugged and said I assumed it was because of who you think I am. She shook her head slowly. No, she said, it's because of who you are. I waited for the insult, the follow-up, the familiar sting. Instead, she reached for the water cup with a trembling hand and took a sip, then said, I spent 30 years calling you a bastard because it was easier than telling the truth. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I asked what truth. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, like she was gathering courage or maybe just energy. She told me that when my mom was young, before she ever met the man I thought was my dad, there was another man, someone my grandmother loved. In a way she never loved her husband, someone who left. She said my mom found letters years later, old letters tucked away in a box in the attic. Letters between my grandmother and that man. Letters that proved a relationship that overlapped with her marriage. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I told her I didn't understand what that had to do with me. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I didn't see cruelty in them, I saw fear. Because she said, you are his, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to accept it. I told her that was impossible, that my mom would have known that my grandfather raised her, that she wouldn't lie about something like that. My grandmother closed her eyes and whispered she didn't know. Not for sure, she suspected. She always suspected. She explained that when my mom got pregnant, young and unmarried, she panicked. She leaned on her parents. She told them she was pregnant and that she didn't know if the father would stick around. My grandmother saw history repeating itself, and something inside her snapped. She said she saw her own reflection in my mom's fear, and instead of protecting her, she tried to control the story. She insisted my mom marry quickly. She insisted the man she chose be the father on paper. She insisted no one ever question it. And when I was born, when she held me for the first time, she said she saw his eyes in my face. The man she loved. The man who left. That's when she started calling me a bastard. She said it felt like punishing herself without anyone knowing why. I sat there frozen. My entire life flashed through my mind, every comment, every look, every moment. I thought I was the odd one out, and suddenly it had a different shape. I asked her why she never told anyone, why she never told my mom the truth. She said because admitting it would destroy everything, her marriage, her image, her control. She said, my grandfather raised my mom believing she was his, and she couldn't take that away from him. Not after he stayed, not after he sacrificed. I asked if my mom knew any of this. She shook her head. No, she said, I took that secret to my grave until now. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to stand up and leave and never come back. Instead, I asked the one question that mattered, did you ever love me? She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched so long, I thought maybe she wouldn't. Then she said, I loved you the only way I knew how, which was wrong. She said, seeing me grow up was like watching the truth walk around with my face. And every time I looked, like him, she felt both love and rage. And instead of dealing with that, she took it out on me. I told her that she ruined my childhood. She nodded, I know. I told her she made me feel worthless. She nodded again. I told her I spent years believing I didn't belong anywhere. And for the first time she cried. Real tears, not the performative kind. She reached for my hand and said, "I know and I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't fix 30 years, it doesn't undo the damage, but hearing it still did something to me I didn't expect. Then she said there was more. She told me that my cousins, the golden grandchildren, the ones she adored, were not biologically related to her at all. My aunt had been adopted, something my grandmother had always known and hidden to keep peace in the family, which meant that by blood, by DNA, by the thing she claimed to care so much about, I was the only one. Her voice shook when she said, "You were my only real grandchild, and I treated you like you were nothing." I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was pacing the room. My thoughts were racing, colliding. I asked her why she would tell me this now. Why wait until she was dying? She said because secrets rot people from the inside, and she was done rotting. She said I deserved to know the truth before she was gone. Even if it meant I hated her, I asked her if she wanted forgiveness. She shook her head. "No," she said, "I want honesty, and I want you to live knowing you were never what I called you." When I left the hospital that day, the sky looked different. I sat in my car for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel, replaying everything. I didn't know who I was anymore or what to do with the truth. But I did know one thing. The woman who spent 30 years trying to erase me had just handed me the one thing she never meant to power, and the real fallout was only just beginning. I didn't tell anyone what she said. Not my mom, not my friends, not even my wife at the time. I carried it like a live wire under my skin because I didn't know which way it would shock me if I touched it. For days after that visit, I moved through my life like I was underwater. Everything felt slower, heavier, muted. I'd be in the middle of a conversation and suddenly hear her voice again. "You were my only real grandchild, and I treated you like you were nothing." I kept replaying my childhood, but now the scenes had different lighting moments that once felt random, suddenly had motives. My grandmother watching me too closely, correcting my posture, commenting on my eyes the way she never did with anyone else. I realized she hadn't been trying to push me away. She'd been fighting herself. That didn't make it okay, but it made it real. A week later, my mom called me crying. She told me Grandma Maggie had taken a turn for the worse. She asked if I wanted to come with her to the hospital. I said yes, even though every part of me wanted to say no. On the drive over, my mom talked about memories, stories about her childhood, about how strict her mother had been. How distant I listened quietly, wondering how much of her life had been built on a lie without her ever knowing. In the hospital room, my grandmother barely opened her eyes. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen. My mom sat on one side of the bed, holding her hand. I stood on the other side, feeling like an outsider again. Except this time I knew I wasn't. My grandmother squeezed my mom's hand weakly and whispered her name. Then she looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. She tried to say something, but couldn't get it out. The nurse came in not long after and gently ushered us out. She died that night. There was no dramatic final confession. No last words passed down like wisdom, just the quiet end of a woman who had spent her life burying the truth and hurting the one person who represented it. The next few days were a blur. Funeral arrangements, casseroles, relatives flying in from out of town. Everyone spoke about what a strong woman she was, how devoted she'd been to family, how she always spoke her mind. I stood there, nodding while my insides twisted. At the funeral, my cousins cried openly. My aunt leaned on my mom, sobbing about how much she'd miss her. My mom cried too, but it was different. It was the cry of a daughter who never quite felt enough and never understood why I watched it all with this strange sense of distance. Like I was seeing my family from the outside for the first time. After the service, my aunt pulled me aside. She told me my grandmother always talked about me, always worried about me, always wondered if I was okay. I almost laughed. The irony was so sharp it hurt. That night, after everyone left, I finally told my mom. I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where she used to help me with homework. The same table where she told me not to ask questions about Grandma Maggie. I told her everything, from the hospital room to the secret, to the words my grandmother said before she died. My mom stared at me in silence for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to the sink, and vomited. When she turned back to me, her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. She kept saying no, no, no over and over. Like if she said it enough times, the truth would disappear. She told me she'd always felt something was off. Her mother had pushed her into that marriage too fast. She'd always wondered why her parents never seemed close, why her father avoided certain topics, why her mother clung so tightly to control. But hearing it out loud was different. She asked me if I believed it. I told her I didn't know how not to. She cried harder than I'd ever seen, not just grief, but betrayal. She said her entire identity suddenly felt fake. She said she didn't know who she was anymore. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. We were both standing in the wreckage of something neither of us had built. A few days later, my aunt came over. She wanted to go through my grandmother's things, paperwork, jewelry photos. The three of us sat in the living room, opening boxes, decades of someone's life reduced to objects. That's when we found the letters. They were in a locked box, hidden under old tax documents. My aunt found the key taped to the bottom of a drawer. Inside were dozens of letters yellowed with age, handwriting neat and deliberate, signed with a name none of us recognized. My mom read the first one and started crying again. The dates lined up. The words were intimate, desperate, full of longing. My grandmother had loved this man deeply. He'd written about wanting to leave, about being scared, about not knowing how. There was one letter that mentioned a baby. My mom folded in on herself. There was no denying it anymore. The truth my grandmother confessed wasn't a dying delusion. It was real. My aunt sat there stunned. Then she said something that shocked both of us. She said, "You know that means," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to, by blood, by DNA, by the standard my grandmother had obsessed over. I was the only biological grandchild in that room. The realization hit all three of us differently. My mom felt grief and anger, my aunt felt confusion and distance, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in my life, the question of where I belonged had an answer, and it wasn't the one I'd been told for 30 years. But knowing the truth didn't magically fix everything. It didn't erase the damage. It didn't make my childhood hurt less. It didn't make my grandmother's cruelty okay. What it did was change the balance of power, because now I had something my family didn't, just a story to tell, but a truth that could shatter the version of our family everyone believed. And the question I couldn't stop asking myself was whether revealing it would heal us or burn everything to the ground. That decision would come later. And when it did, it would change my family forever. Once the letters were out, everything changed, but nothing was said out loud at first. We moved around each other carefully, like there was broken glass on the floor, and one wrong step would cut someone open. My mom asked me not to tell anyone yet. She said she needed time. Time to think, time to grieve. Time to figure out who she even was without the version of her mother she'd believed in for 50 years. I agreed, because despite everything, she was still my mom and she was hurting. But secrets don't stay quiet. They sit in your chest and get heavier every day. At the reading of the will, I understood just how much weight this one carried. We gathered in my grandmother's lawyer's office. Stiff chairs, bland carpet, family tension, so thick you could taste it. The lawyer droned on about accounts and jewelry and property. My cousin sat forward, confident. My aunt squeezed my mom's hand. Then the lawyer got to the house, my grandmother's house, the one she'd lived in for 40 years, the one everyone assumed would go to my aunt. Instead, the lawyer cleared his throat and said the property was being left to me. The room went silent. My cousin laughed out loud, thinking it was a joke. My aunt frowned and said, "There must be a mistake." My mom looked at me like I'd just been accused of something. The lawyer repeated it and slid the papers across the table. The house was mine. No conditions, no shared ownership, just mine. My aunt demanded an explanation. The lawyer said my grandmother had amended her will recently and included a letter addressed to me. I felt like my heart was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The lawyer handed me the envelope. My name was written on it in that same neat handwriting I'd seen in the letters. I opened it with shaking hands. It was short. No justifications, no excuses, just a few lines. She wrote that the house was hers to give and she was giving it to the only grandchild who shared her blood. She wrote that she'd spent her life punishing the wrong person, and this was the only thing she could do to make it right. When I looked up, my aunt was crying. My cousins looked stunned, confused, angry. My mom was pale. That was when my aunt said it out loud. "What do you mean, only grandchild?" The room exploded. Voices overlapping. Accusations flying. My aunt demanded to know what my grandmother meant. My cousin accused me of manipulating her. My mom stood up and told everyone to stop yelling, and then she told the truth. She told them about the letters, the confession, the man my grandmother loved, the man who wasn't my grandfather. She told them that, according to everything we'd found, I was the only biological grandchild. I will never forget the look on my aunt's face. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief, like the ground had dropped out from under her. She said that wasn't possible. She said her mother would have told her. She said blood didn't matter anyway. My cousin snapped back that apparently it mattered enough to leave me the house. The lawyer quietly excused himself. What followed was the ugliest family fight I've ever witnessed. Years of resentment poured out. My aunt accused my mom of stealing her inheritance. My cousin accused me of lying. My mom accused her sister of always being favored. My aunt screamed that favoritism didn't exist. I stood there saying nothing because for once I didn't have to defend myself. The truth was doing that for me. Eventually everyone left. The house was mine, but the family I grew up with felt shattered beyond repair. That night, my mom cried in my arms. She apologized for every time she'd asked me to stay quiet, for every time she'd chosen peace over protecting me. She said she didn't know how to fix what she'd allowed. I told her we'd figure it out together, but the truth is, something had shifted permanently. My cousin stopped calling. My aunt sent a single message saying she needed space. The family group chat went silent. I moved into my grandmother's house a month later. Walking through those rooms felt surreal. Every insult, every look, every word echoed off the walls, but so did the truth. I wasn't the outsider. I'd been made to believe I was the secret. And secrets don't stay buried forever, because what I didn't know yet was that my grandmother had left one more thing behind. One last revelation that would turn everything from painful to devastating. And it was waiting for me in the attic of the house. She left me the place where it all began. I didn't go into the attic looking for answers. I went up there to breathe. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I still wasn't sleeping well, and every room downstairs felt too heavy with memories. So I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up with nothing but my phone flashlight and a knot in my chest. The attic smelled like dust and old cardboard. The air was warm, trapped in time. I stood there letting my eyes adjust. And that's when I noticed a small metal trunk pushed all the way into the far corner. Half hidden behind Christmas decorations and broken furniture, it wasn't locked. Inside were documents neatly stacked, not letters this time, but legal papers, birth records, hospital forms, a yellowed envelope with my grandmother's handwriting again, but this one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to my grandfather. I sat down hard on the floor and started reading. The first document was a birth certificate, not my mom's, mine. But the name listed under father wasn't the man I grew up calling Dad. And it wasn't the man my grandmother confessed about either. It was someone else entirely, a man I had never heard of. I felt dizzy. I flipped through the rest of the papers. There were adoption records, notarized, affidavits, DNA test results, dated from decades ago, sealed correspondence with a lawyer. My hands started shaking so badly, I dropped my phone. The truth hit me in waves so violent, I had to sit there and just let them crash. I wasn't just the product of an affair, I was adopted. My grandmother didn't just lie about who my real grandfather was. She lied about who my mother was. The woman who raised me, the woman I called Mom, the woman who cried in my arms, apologizing for not protecting me. She wasn't my biological mother. She had adopted me in secret, after my grandmother pressured her into it, after a closed adoption arranged through church connections and favors and money. My grandmother had orchestrated everything. The man listed as my biological father was married, powerful, and unwilling to risk scandal. The woman who gave birth to me was sent away quietly, paid off, silenced. And my grandmother decided the solution was to erase the problem completely. Me. She raised her daughter, believing she was childless longer than she was. My mom believed she couldn't have kids. That's why when I was suddenly there, when the story of an unplanned pregnancy appeared, it was never questioned. I was never meant to be loved. I was meant to be hidden. I sat in that attic for hours, staring at the papers, reading them again and again, hoping I was wrong, hoping I misunderstood something, anything. But the truth was airtight. That's why my grandmother hated me. I wasn't a reminder of her mistake, I was proof of her crime. When I finally went back downstairs, it was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the floor with my back against the wall and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not loud, just silent, gasping breaths, like my body didn't know how to process what my brain had learned. The next day, I told my mom. She didn't believe me at first. She laughed, actually, then saw my face, then the papers. She collapsed. She kept saying no, 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 over and over again. She said she would have known. She said she felt me. She raised me. She loved me. And I told her that none of that was a lie. But the rest was, she asked me who my real mother was. I told her I didn't know. The records were sealed under conditions that died with my grandmother. She asked me if I hated her. I told her the truth. I didn't. She raised me. She chose me, even if she didn't know she was choosing. But the damage was done because everything suddenly made sense. The favoritism, the distance, the cruelty, the word bastard. I wasn't a bastard. I was evidence. I didn't tell my aunt. I didn't tell my cousins. I didn't tell anyone else. I sold the house 6 months later and moved across the country. I cut contact quietly, cleanly, no big announcement, no confrontation. Some truths don't heal people. They just explain why you were bleeding. I'm 30 now. I have my own life, my own family. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I still search for faces I don't know, wondering who I came from. But the thing that stays with me, the thing that still keeps me up some nights, is knowing my grandmother spent 30 years calling me a bastard. Not because she believed it, but because if she ever admitted what I really was, everything she built would have collapsed. And in the end, The only thing she couldn't destroy was the truth. Even though she tried to bury it with me, right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. And that's when I realized, the most terrifying part of all, she didn't die hating me. She died knowing I was the only one who could expose her, and she left me just enough breadcrumbs to make sure I did, even if it meant burning everything down, including the family I thought I had. Because some legacies don't end quietly, they just wait for the right person to uncover them, and when they do, the damage doesn't come from what's revealed. It comes from realizing your entire life was built on a lie, and the people who swore they loved you were never supposed to let you exist at all, and the worst part is knowing that if she could have erased me completely, she would have. But she failed. And now the truth is, sitting here, breathing, writing this. Knowing that the woman who tried to make me disappear succeeded in one thing only. She made sure that when everything finally came out, there would be no one left to stop it. And the last thing she ever truly gave me was silence right before everything ended. And I realized she knew exactly what she was doing when she left that attic trunk unlocked, because she wanted me to see it. She wanted me to know, she wanted me to carry it. And she wanted the truth to survive even if she didn't. And that's where it all finally stops, because the story doesn't have a neat ending. It just cuts off right here. When you realize that some families aren't broken by hate. They're broken by secrets, and once you see them, you can't ever unsee them, and you're left standing there holding the pieces, wondering if you were ever meant to be found at all, or if this was always how it was supposed to end. Right when you finally understand everything, and then nothing else is said because there's nothing left to say, and the silence just stays, and it doesn't fade, it just